Hello. In Sidelights on Christian Doctrine by James Orr, we're at the Spirit in Salvation. He's been talking about faith and repentance and faith and justification. Now he reaches to salvation as it is seen to be personal or paternal. Justification, he says, has to do with the judicial aspect of God's character, but there is another aspect of that character which must not be overlooked, the personal or paternal. And this finds expression in the New Testament in the place given to adoption as a blessing of salvation. This is a side of Christian truth which has not always received the attention it deserves, a neglect the more to be regretted than that the doctrine furnishes the reply to the objection sometimes made that justification presents our relations with God in salvation in too exclusively legal a light. It would do so if it stood alone, but it does not stand alone. Adoption, by certain writers, has been treated as part of justification, as the positive side of it, in acceptance. But this is not warranted. If it is wrong to merge, as many do, God's character as judge in that of Father, it is wrong to merge his character of Father in that of judge, and to overlook that God's relation to us is personal as well as judicial. God does not merely pardon the sinner by way of legal acquittal. There is the outflow of paternal tenderness, paternal forgiveness, paternal grace, i.e. the prodigal son of Luke 15. And the soul that comes to him is received by him into a relation of sonship, not merely that forfeited sonship which was its destination by creation, but a relation of honor, nearness, and privilege analogous to Christ's own. If children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. That's Romans 8:17. This is the idea of adoption, of which Paul makes so much, and which is sufficiently distinct from the judicial acquittal to warrant special mention. But the idea has its spiritual side as well. To the act of adoption corresponds the new nature received in regeneration and the spirit of sonship bestowed on believers. Believers are born or begotten of God and are his children through the new life received from God. That according to John 1:12 and 13 and 1 John 3:9 and 10. On those who are his children, God bestows his Spirit, according to Romans 8, verse 15. Because ye are sons, God sent forth the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father, Galatians 4, verse 6. Sonship in the gospel is thus an act of grace, and no terms are deemed adequate to extol its privilege. And again he cites 1 John 3:1 and 2. Here again the question will be asked, but are not all men sons of God? I sought before to show what truth there is in this idea of a universal fatherhood of God to men. Sonship doubtless lay in the creation destiny of man. The filial spirit is the ideal in man's relation to God. This is true, but man by sin forfeited that destiny, made it impossible of realization on a creation basis. If it was to be realized at all, it could only be on the basis of redemption. It is the redemption of Christ alone which can restore the lost privilege of sonship. But Christ does not merely bring us back to the creation standing. He introduces us into the far higher, nobler, diviner relation to the Father already described. Hence it is that in the New Testament we read so little of the merely natural relation and so much of the glory of the spiritual relation of sonship to God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. That's John 1, verse 12. I want to link to a series we did on the divine names, where we reached the climax, of course, in the New Testament, where the common name of God is now the Father. So I'll put the link to that specific video, which is at the end of the series, and also to the first video where you can pick up the thread of the argument as we go through all of the chief designations of the deity from Genesis onward to the Gospel of John at the end of the New Testament. Next time, the Spirit in sanctification.